going to travel the journey of Daniel's path into whiskey. Which means we're starting with Jameson.
So you really did make it about you.
Yeah. You said Daniel Week, and I took that literally.
Literally Daniel
Yeah,
Week.
it's about Daniel. So, we reviewed Jameson before.
Yeah.
But, and we'll do it again. Maybe we'll do even a few Jamesons. Right? Because when I first got started in whiskey, when I was like, okay, I'm going to start drinking whiskey all the time now.
Yeah.
My thing was Irish whiskey. Because it was just so approachable, right? And I didn't like how sweet bourbon was. I didn't like how heavy the wood spice was.
Yep.
And I hadn't yet fallen in love with smoky whiskeys. And I didn't realize yet that in Scotch there were more things than smoky whiskey.
Yeah.
And so I just went, Irish whiskey became... I even wrote a song called Irish Whiskey.
Did you?
When someone said all my songs were depressing. And so I set about trying to write a true happy love song. And it ended up about whiskey. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you the stuff that I always drank because it was budget and it was everywhere. And I still do. It's still a default of mine.
Yeah.
And that is the classic Jameson.
The jug of whiskey.
And the bottle that's meant to go into a whiskey tap. Right? So... this is mostly grain alcohol, and the difference. Remember the difference between in Ireland. You sort of have these different things. You have one thing that's kind of Irish traditional, which is triple distilled.
Yeah.
But not everybody does that. And then you have what's called pure pot still whiskey, which goes back to the original days of describing Irish whiskey specifically, which was what separated. Pot still Irish whiskey is like saying Scotch whiskey, which when everything was made in pot stills.
Yeah.
Right? And then with the advent of column still and the coffee still, you had this way more efficient way of making alcohol. And you would use basically the cheapest grains you could get. And so it ended up being more in corn-based whiskeys and things like that, right? And so a grain column still whiskey, there was actually a legal rule. There was a big battle about whether or not it was really whiskey.
Okay.
And then they eventually won, saying, yes, it is whiskey. And then there became a separation between Irish grain whiskey and pure pot still whiskey. Today, what you have is most brands doing both in the big companies and then mixing them together.
Yeah.
Or doing special releases where just the pot still is happening.
Yeah.
Right? So...
that's always an interesting dynamic. I
see
think.
how this says... full-bodied pot still character Irish whiskey, and then underneath a blend.
Yeah,
it's
that one-word character.
That's because they're mixing the grain whiskey.
If it said full-bodied pot still Irish whiskey, they would have gotten in trouble. Full-bodied pot still character.
Yeah,
Irish
exactly.
Whiskey, and they're good.
Now, what's cool about Irish whiskey is that unmalted barley percentage, which remember they instituted in order to fight the English on taxes.
Yeah.
The English put a tax on malt. And so they started using unmalted barley.
Now remind people what malting does to
malting
barley.
is the process
of
tricking the grain essentially into thinking it's time to grow.
Right.
So it starts converting things into starches.
Okay.
That then can be eaten by yeast.
Okay, so if it's unmalted, are they just throwing barley in there? What are they doing to the barley? How do they...
They heat it up, get it damp, and basically it's like watering your garden and putting it under a heat lamp.
Okay.
Right? You're like, hey, seeds, time to grow. They're like, hey, it's spring.
Right.
And then you dry them and kill them.
Well, that's the malting process, though. So what does it mean to be unmalted? How do they...
unmalted just means that you just take the grain, you crack it so that you can mill it just like you would any normal barley, at a certain level, not as much as corn. And then you get it going. Now, in America, if you have all unmalted grains... it's really hard to get the yeast going. You need enzymes. In America, you can actually add enzymes into the fermentation process to jumpstart the yeast. In Scotland, you can't do that. You have to use malted barley to introduce the enzymes.
Right.
And so if you have a mostly unmalted barley mash, then you can malt a little bit of it, and that introduces the enzymes into the fermentation. Now, this is nice. 3-year-old... a blend of grain. And the interesting thing to me is that in most cases, if you're using a column still grain whiskey, you're actually making something much closer to bourbon. Because they'll have a corn mash bill. Or corn, you're basically making corn whiskey.
So how are we getting...
So it's Irish and Scottish corn whiskey.
So how are we getting that, that it's got the Irish butter, And I think in large part that's from a pot still, from what I understand.
Yeah, I would think that if you get any of the heavier, darker notes in an Irish whiskey, it means that there's some pot still in there somewhere.
Right.
If you get, and this is such a generalization, if you get the bright, brittle, shiny notes, then you're probably being introduced to a grain whiskey at some level in there.
And this isn't new oak in the barrel?
Used oak.
Used oak. So it's not quite bourbon, because the finishing the aging has a lot to do with the final
Has a lot. All right, so finish that. I want to show you the difference between basically this whiskey, just old enough to be called Irish whiskey, and this whiskey at 12 age minimum statement. Whiskey is so much of your own story and telling your own story and showing people who you are. You know what I mean? When you order a whiskey, you're making a statement about something with everybody else standing around you.
I've never fully appreciated that. And you know this about me.
Well, because you're just like, sure. No, your statement about whiskey is, sure, I'll try that.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Well, that's it. That's Rex's statement on all whiskey. Would you like some of this? Yeah, sure.
But beyond that, like a lot of people, they are characterized by their experiences, their stories, what they bring to. I so rarely think about the past. I just don't live there. And whenever it's like story times, like, yeah, tell us about something. I
don't remember anything.
Well, I mean, it's not that I have a, faulty memory. It's just I'm not reliving things that happened.
So when you go to a restaurant, so check out the nose on this, completely different ballgame. Much darker, much more kind of rose and fruit notes in there.
Yeah, it's less brittle, less shiny. This is which one did you say?
This is the 12. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that age.
See how all of the really bright, shiny, brittle notes are sort of muted now?
Yeah.
It's like turning down the highs just a little bit. So when you go to a restaurant and you're like, say, date night with Brandy, and you're going to order a whiskey, what would you order? Because that's more along the lines of like, yeah, this looks cool. Do you order for, that sounds interesting, or do you order for, I know this, I know I'm going to like it?
Real answer?
Yeah.
I read them off to Brandy, my wife, and describe them and let her choose something that sounds interesting to her.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you're going to drink a whiskey and let her try a little bit of it?
Yeah, I'll order whatever she wants to try. She's going to have a couple sips, and some of them she likes.
Some of them she's like... Okay, now...
But you know what? 12 years, though. I would expect that...
Much darker?
I would expect it to be denser and richer. It's still very light.
It's an Irish and Scottish day outside right now. Imagine that kind of weather with the fact that means the whiskey doesn't get pushed into the wood nearly as much as it does here.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's used oak. But that's the thing. Not only do you have used oak, which is going to lower everything, right? I mean, look at Balcones. This is a difference, even in Texas,
right, between
used oak and new oak. So this is the Balcones new oak, and then the Balcones used oak.
Do they have to age this longer?
No.
But so the heat's still...
I mean, this is 32 months, and this is 23 months.
Oh, okay.
Right, but still...
No, it's meaningfully different.
Even without that extra year, right? Obviously, it's not going to be the same, but that's a big deal, right? Now imagine that, plus it never really gets that hot.
Yeah.
So you can sort of let things sit for a long time. So we're going to end with the stout version, and I'm kind of excited about this because we just sent one of our barrels off to Acapon Brewery, and they filled it with a stout.
Ooh.
And it's sitting in their brewery right now.
And then we're going to get it back.
And when it's done, we're going to put a whiskey in it.
Stout.
The stout.
The cask mates.
Now, this is really probably closer in age to the entry-level Jameson.
The creaminess.
It's just, it really is the creaminess. It's so rich. If this had been around when I was drinking Irish all the time, I might never have strayed beyond the bounds of Irish whiskey, because this is just so friendly.
Cream. It's so friendly. Cream.
Oh, Lord.
What?
That's going to have to be edited.
How is that? That just... Cream is
because you made it a verb.
Cream is
once you... Cream, instead of...
Cream is a friendly...
of an adjective.
Is a friendly condiment.
No.
It's a friendly table-side condiment.
Until you make it a verb. Then it becomes a problem. If you keep it an adjective, you're good. But you switched from adjective to verb, and now it's a problem.
So... I cream.
God,
It's not.
that's even worse. That's way worse.
PC.
Chad, save us from ourselves.
You didn't say the magic word.
I think we should end now while we're
Daniel
ahead.
Week!
Yes, to fighting, stealing, and drinking.
Fight me, fight for a friend.
If you steal, may it steal lovers' hearts.
If you drink,
May you drink with us.
Så folket. Julein snop says never much room.
Time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping into the future. Time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping into the future. Want to fly like an eagle, with the sea. Fly like an eagle, something, something on me.